The widow Paola Saverini lived with her son in a humble shack pressed against the fortress wall of Bonifacio. The town, perched on a jagged promontory that in places jutted out over the sea, gazed across a strait bristling with submerged rocks toward the gentle shores of Sardinia. On the opposite side, at the foot of the cliffs, ran a deep fissure that nearly encircled the town, a vast stone corridor that served as a harbor. Through this narrow passage, flanked by sheer rock faces, came Italian and Sardinian fishing boats, and twice a month, a wheezing old steamer bound for Ajaccio. A cluster of houses stood out on the white cliff like a brighter patch of white. They loomed over the ominous corridor, too narrow for large ships to enter, and resembled the nests of wild birds clinging to the rock. The wind never ceased its assault, raking the sea, gnawing at the bare, weather-beaten shore, sparsely covered with coarse grass. It tore through the strait, battering its edges. Pale ribbons of foam clung to the black outcroppings that pierced the waves here and there, as if scraps of sailcloth were drifting and thrashing on the surface. The widow's cottage, perched at the very edge of the coastal cliff, looked out through 3 windows onto this wild, joyless expanse. She lived there with her son Antonio and a dog named Semillante, a large, lean shepherd with coarse fur. The young man often took her hunting. One evening, after a quarrel, Antonio Saverini was treacherously stabbed to death. His killer, Niccolo Ravellati, fled to Sardinia that very night. When passers-by brought her son's body, the old woman did not cry. She stared at him for a long time, unmoving. Then, stretching her wrinkled hand over the corpse, she swore vengeance. She refused company and locked herself inside the house with the howling dog. Semillante lay at the dead man's feet, muzzle stretched toward him, tail tucked, howling without pause. She did not move, just as the mother did not move, bent over the body, shedding silent tears. The young man lay on his back, as if asleep, dressed in a rough woolen jacket torn and pierced at the chest. He was soaked in blood on his shirt, ripped open in a futile attempt to save him, on his vest, trousers, face, and hands. Clots of blood clung to his hair and beard. The old woman spoke to him. At the sound of her voice, the dog fell silent. Don't worry, I'll avenge you, my boy, my poor child. Sleep now, sleep in peace. I'll avenge you. Do you hear? Your mother promises it. And a mother, you know, always keeps her word. She slowly leaned down and pressed her cold lips to his lifeless ones. Semillante howled again, long, mournful, harrowing. That is how they spent the night. The next day, Antonio Saverini was buried, and soon Bonifacio ceased to speak of him. He had no brothers, no male kin to avenge him. Only his aging mother thought of revenge. Across the strait, on the coastal cliffs, she could see a white speck, Longasardo, a Sardinian village where Corsican bandits took refuge when pursued too fiercely. It was there, among his own kind, that Niccolo Ravellati was hiding. Day after day, the old woman sat by the window, staring in that direction, consumed by thoughts of vengeance. She was old, alone, nearly at death's door. But she had sworn an oath. Forgetting was impossible. Sleep abandoned her, and she searched relentlessly for a way to strike back. At her feet, the dog dozed, occasionally lifting her head to howl into the distance. Since her master's death, she had often howled like that, as if calling to him, as if her animal soul preserved an indelible memory. Then one night, as Semillante whimpered again, a thought came to the mother, wild, cruel, but clear. She pondered it until dawn, then went to church. Sprawled on the cold stone floor, she prayed, imploring God to grant her the strength to avenge her son. Returning home, she overturned an old rain barrel, secured it with stakes and stones, tied Semillante to it, and went inside. Now she paced the room tirelessly, eyes fixed on the shores of Sardinia. The killer was there. The dog howled day and night. In the morning, the old woman brought her only a bowl of water, no bread, no broth. Another day passed. Semillante, exhausted, slept. The next day, her eyes gleamed, her fur bristled, and she began to strain violently against the chain. Still, the old woman did not feed her. The dog barked hoarsely, driven mad by hunger. Another night passed. At dawn, the widow Saverini went to a neighbor and asked for 2 bundles of straw. She found her late husband's old rags, stuffed them with straw, and fashioned a crude human figure. She drove a stake into the ground in front of the dog's shelter and tied the dummy upright. From a bundle of old linen, she made a head. Semillante stared at the straw man in silence, though hunger gnawed at her. Then the old woman bought a long piece of blood sausage. She lit a fire near the kennel and began to roast it. Semillante went wild, straining at the chain, foam dripping from her jaws, eyes locked on the sizzling meat. The old woman tied the steaming sausage around the dummy's neck like a scarf. She adjusted it carefully, as if driving it deeper into the straw throat. Then she unleashed the dog. With a monstrous leap, Semillante lunged at the figure, threw her paws onto its shoulders, and tore at the throat. She fell to the ground with a piece of meat in her jaws, then attacked again, biting through the ropes, ripping chunks of food, shredding the face, turning the neck into tatters. The old woman stood motionless, her eyes burning, watching. Then she chained the dog again, starved her for 2 more days, and repeated the strange exercise. For 3 months, the widow Saverini trained Semillante in a brutal ritual, a game of hunger and violence, where food had to be torn from the throat of a straw effigy. Gradually, she stopped tying the dog down. Now a mere flick of her hand was enough to send Semillante lunging at the dummy. The dog had learned to attack even when no morsel hung from the figure's neck. Her reward for ferocity and persistence was always the same: a slice of roasted blood sausage. At the sight of the effigy, Semillante would begin to tremble. Her eyes would dart toward her mistress, and the old woman, raising a finger and rasping the command, would shout, "Take it." When the widow felt the time had come, she went to confession. On Sunday morning, she received communion with fervent devotion. Then, dressed in ragged men's clothing, transformed into a tattered old beggar, she bargained with a Sardinian fisherman who agreed to ferry her and the dog across the strait. In a coarse canvas sack she carried a generous piece of blood sausage. Semillante had been starving for 2 days. The old woman kept her agitated, letting her sniff the pungent scent of meat. They entered Longasardo. The Corsican woman limped along the street. She stopped at a bakery and asked where Niccolo Ravellati lived. He had returned to his old trade, working alone as a carpenter in a small workshop. The old woman pushed open the door and called out, "Hey, Niccolo." He turned. At that moment, she unleashed the dog and cried, "Take him, tear him, rip him." Semillante, crazed, sprang forward and sank her teeth into his throat. The man flung out his arms, tried to seize her, but collapsed to the floor. For several seconds he writhed, kicking against the boards, then lay still. The dog kept tearing at his neck, shredding the flesh into bloody tatters. 2 neighbors, sitting on their doorstep, later recalled seeing a ragged old man emerge from the carpenter's shop, followed by a lean black dog that chewed something brown as it walked, scraps tossed to her by her master. By evening, the old woman had returned home. That night, she slept peacefully.